maybe renegotiate with all of them and see if we can get them into a different plan that's cheaper, that still provides the same level of service?
It tends to be a legal question because it's usually under some contract. And can that contract be changed? Can it unilaterally be changed? And my understanding when it comes to labor negotiations and such, there is a process set up where cities can renegotiate and, in a case, unilaterally make a decision on it. There are, for the cities that went into Chapter 9, it was doable. Because they could threaten under Chapter 9, they were going to take it all away. And so there were lots of considerations made in terms of reducing the costs and such. And that included also going out and getting cheaper plans, making sure when they hit Medicare that they got off our plans and went on to the Medicare and such. So I don't know the level of negotiations that have been carried on, but obviously you look towards that. But it also affects the current employees because they're all going to participate one day in that. So.
And then the last question I have is, I had mentioned earlier about possible RFP. Have you had the opportunity, we talked briefly about that, have you had the opportunity or the chance to think about what might be the best options as what we might send out for an RFP?
I have. I'm not going to divulge them at this time because I don't want to forewarn some of the departments that I'm coming. Okay. But obviously, the answer is yes. The first city I managed had 22 employees and contracted out every service. But it was a small city, but it contracted with the county, with private engineering, everything. And so I'm familiar with the contract form of government, a lot easier to manage and such. You usually don't have big union contracts or anything. So I am familiar with that, and I've gone through assessing. I've done it in 4 different cities where I've taken all the revenues and lined them up with the departments. So example, what you come up with in police, if you don't have a Measure U, you come up using a hunk of property tax for that. And then you see where the revenues don't meet the cost, the expenditures. And so you take a look at, well, is there any other kind of revenues, or can we reduce the cost or whatever? It really works well for fee-based kinds of things like building inspection and things like that. But the general fund revenue tends to go where you can't do fees and such. And so, but I've looked at it that way because it can give you a focus on what you need to focus on and such. So there are all kinds of tools. Again, I harken back to the statement that there's no cost accounting. And so this sets up kind of a cost accounting where you can see how your revenues meet. It sets up cost centers. So. And we can do that here too, but that's an option. You look at contracting out, and then you get, whatever becomes political after that. So,
all right, thank you.
Well, just on the grant side, I don't necessarily agree that there isn't a whole lot of money out there. However, one has to remember that that process takes about 2 years. So you applying itself takes about a year, and the review by the funding agencies takes another year. So it's 2 years before you see any benefit from your effort. So in that regard, I know we have put in some grants for infrastructure that's badly needed, and we wished it happened yesterday, but the state takes their time.
Right.
And hopefully we'll see something before the end of this fiscal year, because they like to push everything out. I don't know where we really are with regards to the status of the applications we've submitted, but if we're anywhere close, they'll try and get those out soon. So we'll be checking on that.
Okay, so you've got people that want to speak?
I have 3 that want to speak that have submitted requests slips. Good evening, Council. Well, here we are again, another year, and here I am back talking about the budget. So what I would like to see, since we went through this last year, and it took over a month to be able to get the budget actually in place, is that when everyone hands in their budget for what they think they need for the year or 6 months or however that works, that they have to stay within their budget. I don't understand you say this is how much I think I need, and then you've looked at everything, you have all the information in front of you, and you say, okay, this is what's I'm gonna need for cost, and then you come in and, oh, I need to amend, and I don't get to do that. If I set a budget for my house or for my work, I don't get to amend it and go to the bank and say, gee, I'm sorry, I'm off, I need more money. So I would like to see that when this budget this year comes up, that we actually stick to our budget, because I think we can. And I think there are a couple ladies on the board that have been through this a lot, at least the last 5 years, and so they know, you all know how it goes. And two, we have money in CDs that are in the bank that can make us about $15,000 a year in interest alone. But we're not getting that interest. We're getting a lower interest than we should be getting, because whoever put those in the bank went at I think a 0.1 as opposed to a 0.3% interest rate. So there's some money sitting in there right now that we could use, that we could have to use, and we're not using it properly, and it's just sitting in the bank right now. So that's what I really do commend the city manager tonight. I was more informative than last year, I do have to say. So it did answer a lot of questions for me, but I would like to see that if we do a budget, if we could stick to it as close as possible, that would be awesome, because I know I have to. So thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple things. Lorena, do you want to come up and address why the reasoning for the budget adjustments? Because I know that I've sat on boards for nonprofits and for-profit corporations, and there's always mid-year and quarterly budget adjustments, because a lot of the revenues are based on projections, and sometimes when you project at the beginning of the year, sometimes those projections are low or high, and so you have to adjust for accounting purposes. So, Lorena, if you want to address that.
I understand. I'm just saying, as close as we can stay, and there is money that we have.
That's always the goal, and we're addressing the issue with the investments and that we're working on.
I would like to point out that when you put a budget together, you go low on revenues and a little high on expenditures, so you build a cushion in that too. You don't want to get to a place where expenditures so outstrip the forecast in the budget that it hurts it. So we try to put some fail-safes in there to make sure we come out the way we budgeted.
Next speaker.
Hello, I have just a question first. I looked at this 18-19 budget, and it looks like we're in the red, 3.5 million. However, if you take out Measure U, we're out $7 million. That's a big difference. And my problem in looking at all these financial statements is that they're impossible to reconcile from year to year. 2015, there was a $100 million decrease because of pensions and a deficit that showed up. But if you look at the CAFR, you would never be able to see that $100 million decrease, because they changed it. They revised it when they changed accounting firms in 15, interestingly enough. But my point is, I am hoping that this council and this budget will be much more transparent, because if we're going to run expenses $7 million more, we're going to lose half of what's there. So we're running into debt a lot quicker than is being presented. And I do want to say, 100% I'm behind Measure U. I don't even want to bring Measure U into this discussion, other than to say, if you take it out of this budget, we're going to lose $7 million. You got to take a lot more steps than what's being presented. Otherwise, half of the operating budget's going to be gone this year or next year.
Well, if I may say something, if we didn't have Measure U in there in the first place, the public safety costs wouldn't be as high either, because additionally, the Measure U paid for that. So you can say 7 million, but it's not really 7 million, because
It approved expenses and income. Right.
Yeah.
The problem is, though, numbers are always fishy here. And I've been looking at them since 2012. In 2015, they changed the format of the net position statement, so it's very difficult to track the different line items. So my point is, when you do this budget, people don't want just explanations. We need to see the hard numbers. According to this, if I take out Measure U, just looking at the numbers, we're going down $7 million, and that wipes out half of what we have. So that's scary. So I'm saying, look at these numbers, please, and be very transparent. Don't hide under Measure U. Let us know what the situation is, because we just want to know. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
May I address
Go
that?
ahead. Absolutely.
Thank you. I just want to make it clear, it's not $7 million. I don't know if I can go back to that slide, but estimated resources or revenues is $51.5 million. Of that, $11.2 million is Measure U. On the expenditure side, we come up with $47.8 million in expenditures plus $3.8 in operating transfers that go out from the general fund. So below that, we have some reserves. That means that there's money that even though we collect it as a revenue, we can't spend it for general fund purposes. They have to be set aside. So I've set that aside. $330,000 of that is PEG fees and the ambulance penalty fees that can only be used for those specific projects. Right below that, I have a reserve for future Measure U expenditures. That means that I took the expenditures for police Measure U and the expenditures for fire Measure U, took the difference between what we're projecting to spend and what we're projecting to collect in Measure U, and I'm setting it aside. I'm not using it. That's that $3.05 million that's there. So the $3.5 million is real, and it's already taking Measure U out of the equation.
And just so it's clear to the public too, perhaps some of these need to be identified as a set aside. So,
right, and it may be stated as a reserve, but this is more in the form of an expense, income expense sheet, where if we had a balance sheet that those items that are not being spent, they're actually in a reserve, needs to show as in a reserve account instead of in the expense column.
yeah.
That's the part that makes it confusing for the public and for people that read the title, estimated uses. We're not using the money, we're putting it into savings.
Right, but because this isn't more like a balance sheet, we don't have cash accounts here, we're showing really expenditures and revenues. That's why I'm taking that out of the equation at the bottom.
Right, but I'm just saying it's not out of the equation if it's still in the expense column. And so if we had,
No, it is, as reserved.
I'm just trying to help you make it clearer for the public. So I'll give you some ideas later.
This is my fear. Measure U is not evergreen. It runs out. It's giving public safety $10 million a year to spend. If that measure is not renewed, you have created a $10 million a year hole that obviously subsequent councils and city managers will have to deal with. And so that's why we took a look at the 5 years and such. where we're going to be in 5 years. And probably at that time, we'll be contemplating a renewal of Measure U and such. So there's a prospect here that doesn't look appeasing at all, but we all have to contemplate that what we're doing is creating a legacy 5 to 10 years down the road on how the city can operate.
With that, that's why it's very important for me that this community continues to grow economically, so that when we get to year 10 of Measure U, we are generating in the regular general fund sales tax revenue an additional $10 million. Howard, if you could fill out a form for us too, please.
Thank you.
Speak first and then you can fill it out.
We have one other speaker. Okay.
Thank you. As co-chair of Measure U and for Keep Hemet Safe Pact that's still in place, just for the record, when those of us involved with the city's then manager and council members sat to talk about doing a tax, first we insisted it be a state recognized safety tax, so the change in councils didn't affect use of dollars. Then when that failed by 600 votes, we went back and did Measure U, because if we couldn't lower crime and change reputation, we weren't going to be able to build our economics, and we all agreed on that. We intentionally, as I've shared with Alan, sunset it because there was a long history before any of you that raised the question of voter trust. And we simply said, let's go down the road for 10 years. Let's prove to the voters that the city can be trusted as stewards of the money. And then that accountability mechanism, we'll go back and do it again. By the way, we spent $440,000 from private party, all matter of public record, to fund Measure U. Well, I believe with the city's good leadership on public safety and the use of Measure U, you'll have the support. But Alan's right, you can't count on year 11. It requires performance to encourage us to come back. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. One of the things, too, that I want to point out about what you're saying about the city being good stewards of the money, I think that this council and previous councils have done their very best to be good stewards of local money. The problem is, and one of the things that was pointed out in the slide, is that RDA was taken away. A lot of other taxes were taken, the vehicle license fee and taxes were taken from the cities, and so that put a $5 million burden on the city of Hemet, just like it did with other cities, put that huge burden. So I think that the city is trying to do, we're doing the best we can within the constraints with the expectations of what the public wants. They want the clean streets, they want, all these services, and we're doing the best we can to find that money to pay for it. So, I think you're spot on, and I think that public safety has shown over this past year that has been the priority, and the results of that have been very clear. So I think that's going to help continue to push that economic drive to further to help then continue to raise sales tax revenue beyond what Measure U is providing. Any other speakers want to speak on this topic? Sue?
I very much, as a person of the community, would like to thank the city manager for a concise, well-presented explanation of the budget. I actually would have applauded you at the end. It's how good of a job I thought you did. It's not a pretty topic, and you presented it with a nice presentation. I also would like to tell this city council I admire each of you for making some decisions going forward that are not going to be probably popular, that are probably not going to be easy. There's nothing easy about this. It comes down to the 5 of you to make a decision. So many decisions, it sounds to me like. So I thank you for being council persons. and I thank him. And I also thank him for telling us that we better stick to Measure U and what it's intended for, which is, again, the city council, hard position. So I want to thank you guys for Timmit. I love Timmit, okay? And I'm counting on you guys to pull it through. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dan?
It's like every time I come up here, I keep telling you I don't ever want to have your job, because you have to make these really tough decisions. But I do thank the council for the decisions that you have to make and the responsibility that, and the thought process that you put into them. My concern, obviously, is the same as probably everybody else that's sitting in this room, is Measure U. You see that you're running a surplus. We know that it sunsets in 10 years. That surplus, if banked over the course of 10 years, unless my math is incorrect, gives you an extra 3. If you start dipping into that to take Measure U dollars to start paying for public safety wage increases, you're going to be at a hiring freeze. So therefore, the goals of Measure U are going to be cut short. Public safety will take a hit because you're projecting at 3.5, but we're still trying to hire, I think, probably like another 20 officers. So as you start dipping into that and that goes away, your surplus goes away, now your base has to increase. How do you cover the additional officers? Tough decisions. But I figured that out in about 5 minutes. So, I don't envy the choice. I would just emphasize that please use Measure U for what it's for. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Are there anybody else that wants to speak on this topic?
I do. Let me point out something. In some ways, it feels like I'm punting back to the council. You know, there are some choices, make some policy decisions. Well, the difficulty here is you are the policymakers, and I don't want to make policy through the budget. I don't understand the history of the community. I don't understand how it's interwoven and such. And so I feel comfortable in giving it back to you because you didn't give me guidance on it. So I just wanted to make it clear what this is about. I can give you my best shot on what we can do based on what I understand, but you're in a better position to advise me than I am you.
I don't know, I'd like to hear the best shot. I'd like to hear the best shot. No, you've had a lot of experience with this, in the cities that you've helped, and we do look to you for clear options and how to get there. Us agreeing and providing policy is another story, but we look for your expertise in developing that plan and moving forward and hoping to get us through this as easily as we can. So I encourage you to share those ideas and let us make the decisions from there.
Okay. We have a meeting the 29th, and on the agenda is additional discussion, and we'll present what we think would be the best politically and comfortably to deal with this particular deficit. Okay.
Is that all you have for us?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is a work study, so we should, do we have anybody want to provide some direction for the next meeting on the 29th? For this
Yeah, and I know it's a very few days until the next, our next meeting on this, but just to have maybe an idea of, at that point, of where you think we can do some cost cutting, where you would have an inkling of where contracting may save us money and the things we should be looking at that point that we haven't looked at in prior years. And I know we've got a couple of them in process, but if there are some others that you have done in other cities, I would definitely like to hear about them.
I'd like to put a freeze on additional purchases for the rest of this year. They have to come to me in order to make sure that it's important and that it's not spending money that's sitting in an account. I'd like to put the moratorium on. I don't know for how long, but we could sort of judge it. I may have to come back to you with an amendment to take it off. But unless it's a key position, in my judgment, your judgment, I think those are two of the, they're not easy things, but because you're not getting people layoffs and things like that, and it may cause some difficulty in performing the services and such. But I think those are the first two that need to be done, and you need to start now on it. We need a hiring freeze. It's just a simple step. That won't affect Measure U, obviously, but in terms of the general fund. So those are two of my primary. We have some balances in the workers' comp liability fund. Excess money was budgeted in that. I think that can be tapped. So I think I can come close to addressing the situation. Just dealing with those at this point. At the same time, we obviously need, Chris has just been here about a month, and what am I on, 9 months, something like that. We need to take some time, and we're not going to bring a consultant in, and we need to evaluate, what can be costed out, where we can cut, if we can cut, how does it compare to what the private sector can do. And so we bring you intelligent recommendations, not just pie in the sky kinds of things. So I think there's some things on the interim that we can do that won't be heartbreaking necessarily, but start by us some time to take a look at the organization as we need to take a look at it.
I appreciate that, and I think sometimes a set of fresh eyes is the best thing in the world. So thank you.
I don't know how fresh my eyes are anymore.
Referring to Chris.
Yeah, another set of eyes. I just want to, I appreciate your insight into, based on your past experience and what you think is the most pragmatic way to approach it. I'd just like to emphasize, if I might use the word partnership, that has to come into play, because if we do things like a moratorium on hiring, that means that we have a partnership with our staff that is going to be continuing to assume tasks that are not necessarily in their venue of responsibilities, but they're doing them now. And so a moratorium would mean that they continue to do those for a period of time. And also in the partnership, the community comes into play, because if there's a lack of service provision ability because we have vacancies that we're carrying, we're not going to be working as to the capacity that we could or should. So the partnership falls on the community to be patient while we work through that, and be understanding that we're trying to sail a ship with less than a full crew. And so I think that understanding is a critical component of any partnership. And partnerships, whether it's a marital partnership or a business partnership, has some pain along with it. And so I just think it's important that everybody maintain that understanding and acknowledgement that we'll get through this, but it's going to take everybody working together toward that end.
There's one comment I want to make on the lack of trust. Frankly, having not been here long enough, I don't quite understand it. I've read the last two audits. The one 2 years ago had some minor items or whatever. Got a clean bill of health in terms of the way the city is being run. There's no lawsuits going on relative to council or anything like that. There's no impugning going on and such. And so this is as clean as a city that I've worked in. I mean, in my last job, I had 2 councilmen go to jail. So, and so I would just like to encourage, it's kind of a new day. We've got a couple new council people, 3. You have a new city manager that's been around for a long time. give us a shot. We're going to be as transparent as we can be, and as beneficial to you as citizens, and judge us later. Give us a chance.
I have something to say too, along the lines of what Russ said. This is a hard decision, and this is going to be a hard decision for all of us and all of you watching, and it's going to hurt some of us. But, all of us have to take it like a team, and we really need to stop like the infighting and the backstabbing and the going around and trying to get people to do this and get people to do that. We have the job. We were the elected officials. Nobody else ponying up and is doing what we're doing. So a little bit of respect would be great.
Okay. Do you have adequate direction at this point for the next meeting?
I'm fine.
Okay. All right. So we've got nothing else?
No, sir.
Nothing else? All right. We will adjourn until May 29th.